There are always outlines on the back communion tables, and always delightful to have each of you here. We're going to be looking at Esther chapter 3 tonight, and we always welcome people who, some from near and some from far, listen in. We occasionally have dear friends in England listen in, and also a dear friend in Canberra, which is the capital of Australia. So you guys that are a long ways away, whenever you get to listen to this, we're glad you're faithful and glad that you're able to listen in to us. I've entitled our lesson tonight a case study, and I like the word case study because, let me take a half step back. One of the things that Raymond Kelsey talked to us in ministry a lot about is that he said, guys, it would be prudent, not required, but it would be prudent if all preachers had the possibility of a second job or a second income. If for whatever reason you needed to be involved in something else other than preaching. And I will always remember, and Brother Kelsey was a master at this, we were just having a class on ministry, life, and work, and he just said, who do you think is the greatest preacher in the brotherhood? So you have to go back to the early 70s, and so some people would talk about, Baxter Barrett Baxter, and he preaches on Herald of Truth and teaches at Lipscomb, and Jimmy Allen campaign, just a whole group of wonderful men who are doing a great ministry. And he let us all just kind of talk and share and go through that. And then he said, from my point of view, probably the greatest preacher in the brotherhood is living in a place like Washington and Oregon, preaching for a small church, living in a trailer house, and he's supporting himself so this church has a local preacher to speak for them every Sunday morning, and none of us will ever know his name. So he said, I would just encourage you to have that option in your life. And so, in addition to doing a study in religious education, then I did being a high school teacher in social studies from junior high and high school. It won't mean a whole lot to you, but I did 166 hours in 4 years. So you can kind of divide that out and kind of get some idea of the track meet that was on to do that. And did my student teaching in junior high. And so you'll see why things like visuals and things like that are always important to me, because I always want a younger part of our congregation to be involved in things so it's just not an adult-only service. And with Everett Hufford, we're on the northwest shore of the Sea of Galilee, and he said, this is probably the place where Jesus taught the Sermon on the Mount. And he said, can you see our Lord pointing over here and said, behold the lilies of the field? And he said, because he's Jesus, can you imagine, see the birds of the air? And he said, notice how often Jesus put something physical with the spiritual teaching that he was teaching. And that has always just been a big impression for me. When we were at Campbelltown, we started again a church from scratch. And one of our big concerns was, what do our kids get out of one Bible class? What do our kids get out of worship? And what do our kids get out of the Lord's Supper? And we always wanted to do things that were interactive so that as our children are growing up, that they would become participants in the activities and not just spectators. So the word case study is a very interesting tool that's used in social studies. And you present a scenario, you present an event, you ask some questions, and then you divide people up and say, and what did you learn from this? So obviously in our setting, we won't be able to do the latter part, but we're still going to look at, just kind of like in chapter 3, here's a case study, and I've entitled it, The Dangers of Pride and Anger. And these are two totally different men in different situations, but both of them are they're more alike than different is the term that we're going to use in terms of their pride and anger. So in Esther 3, if you see CI, every lesson will always have 15 words or less. Our point tonight is Haman's pride prodded him on to develop a plot against the entire Jewish nation. And I still just kind of looked at this, through the week and just kind of shook my head and held my head, and I thought, he's just upset at one man. And look what pride is going to call, and anger is going to cause him to do, because he is upset with this one Jew who will not bow down to him. His pride prods and pushes him on where he's going to make a plot to try to destroy an entire nation just because of his objection to one person. And you just think the magnitude of that is totally out of proportion, but that becomes an integral part of the plot of the story. So our aim, I want us to do a case study of the consequences of anger and pride in Haman's life. If you look down at number 3, just in these opening ones, and these are verses from our wonderful experience in growing up in the Sarah Church. There were certain verses that we were repeated and we were just expected to know. The way that I heard this was, whatsoever things are written aforetime are written for our learning, that we, through patience and the comfort of the Scriptures, might have hope. My dad was the ultimate people person, auctioneer. He had about 8 different jobs to keep the farm going. A lot of days he started at 4:30 and he trotted until 10:30 that night. Son, never walk if you can trot. And he went to town, he trotted into the lumberyard, he trotted into the bank, and he was a jockey about this tall. And one of the things he was doing when I came in the world, he was breaking horses for grocery money. So if Marvin has a horse he couldn't ride, you bring it to my dad, and with bumps and bruises and whatever else, he breaks that horse, and Marvin gives him $25, and he can ride his horse. Can I say that's a tough way to earn $25? But one of my dad's statements was, he said, some people never learn from their past mistakes. And then he'd say, son, life is too short for you have to learn everything the hard way. And so here's this verse from the Old Testament. These things in the Old Testament, guaranteed, they're inspired, they're true, holy men of God spake as they were moved by the Holy Spirit, but they were written for our learning and our instruction, and I would say it this way, we are to learn lessons in a negative way as well as lessons in a positive way. Other than just a sentence, I won't give any more. I worked in several churches going through OC in our early years in Memphis. The first church was fabulous, wonderful, wonderful. The second church, the preacher stood at the back, and he was like an automated, you had to catch him on the way up, and he was the least people person I've ever met. And that was the experience there. We went to another church, and everything in this congregation had to be about the preacher. And if we played softball, he had to pitch or play center field and bat fourth, or he sat on the end of the bench and pouted. And then the next place we were in Mississippi, and the preacher was from Detroit. Can I use the word Yankee? And you can just imagine how things are going to go there. Dear friend, Lyndall Boland had been at Sayre during junior high and early high school, and we would stay in touch, and he would just say, now, how are things going? And I would explain this, and here it comes. He said, you grew up in a really, really good church and a good family, and it is as important to learn what not to do as it is to learn what to do. And you think, isn't that an important lesson? We oftentimes think, oh, this is the example, and this is what we ought to do. But tonight, a part of the case study is here are some examples of what not to do and the consequences of it. And so these men in the flesh and in their lives and in their words and their actions are going to be examples of particularly some scriptures that we'll read in a bit from the book of Proverbs about that. And here's one of those. And this is the second point there. Proverbs 16:18. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. One of my teachers used this wonderful expression. He said, the Proverbs are sentence sermons. And the second line always interacts with the first, and it either will extend it, or if it says but, it will go the other direction. But both of these say the same thing in a different way. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Many of you are excellent Bible students, and you think, doesn't this describe Haman in one verse? And so as we anticipate the events are going to start and the plot of the story is going to start thickening, then notice the things that happen. We're in Esther chapter 3. Here's this initial conflict between Mordecai and Haman. And again, Esther's mom and dad had died. Mordecai is a cousin. I'm sure he's older. He has adopted. He has brought her into his house. Vashti would not appear before the drunken crowd. She's deposed. And they have this contest, and Esther's selected as the queen. And so because of this, then Haman is at the gate of the palace. And we don't know if he has an official position or if he just, can I use our term, hangs out there? But he's there on a very regular basis. And we just got a little snippet last week. Oh, he heard two of the servants plotting to kill the king. That was reported. It was found to be true. And so we pick up tonight. He's still at the opening of the palace, and it's going to attract a negative attention as the story develops. 3:1. After these things, King Ahasuerus, Xerxes, promoted Haman the Agagite and advanced him and set his throne above all the officials who were with him. And all the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him, but, and then here's where the fly gets in the ointment, but Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage. We're not given any reason, not given any explanation. All we're told is, this is, can I use the word protocol? This is the way things are. The guy has been promoted. Let me process and think just a second how the best way to say this. Some people can get promoted beyond competence. Okay, a Peter principle. And as we read through what's going to take place, this is going to be one of those guys. He would have been better off to stay where he was. I actually heard a man say once, when I become an elder, things are going to change around here. And by the grace of God, I was able to leave before that happened. But you think, it wasn't a service, it was an office. And so here he has been promoted, and I'm just going to graciously say it goes completely to his head. So we're down in chapter 3, 5 through 6, and this is where he finds out that out of all the people in the kingdom, there's one person who doesn't bow down to him. Isn't that terrible? And so notice, 3:3, the king's servants who were at the gate said to Mordecai, "Why do you transgress the king's command?" And when they spoke to him day after day, he would not listen to them, and they told Haman in order to see whether Mordecai's words would stand, for, and here it comes, he had told them he was a Jew. Now, we're not told why. We know, for example, in the book of Daniel, they're not going to bow down to images and statues. So the story doesn't give us any details about why, other than he is not just going to, at random, bow down before a human being. Yes, Kelly? We're going to continue the conflict hundreds of years later. The comment was, and we're going to come to this, centuries earlier there was a conflict between the Jews and the Amalekites and this group, and Samuel is going to actually hack the king up in pieces. But we'll see the verse here, there's enmity between these people in a long giving way. While we were in Mississippi, Notre Dame came and Ole Miss beat them that year. And I'm in the foyer with some deacons, and these are deacons, and they say, if those blank Yankees would come down here more often, we'd teach them some finer points of the game. And I said, guys, the war's over. To which I was told, to be put in my place, son, we ain't killing people, but the war is far from over. So here we are, generations and generations away from the original event, but it's still alive and well, and we'll see the verses here that's probably a good part of that and anticipate that. So now we're in 3:5, and this is where, again, the plot thickens. Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage to him, and he was filled with fury. Wrecked his whole day. And I just want you to think about this. Think of all the other things that he has going in his favor, all the other things that are basically good. He's got a promotion, he's got all these other stuff, and just the one little bitty thing, as we continue on, is going to eventually destroy his life. And you can't overlook this one small fault. Verse 6, he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone. And see a part of the case study, what does this tell us about somebody? That it's one grievous incident in his eyes, but rather than just inflicting it on him, we now just have to spread this to the whole nation. They had made known to him the people of Mordecai, so Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, throughout the entire kingdom of Ahasuerus. So here's the plot, and we're in chapter 3, verse 7. He's going to go to the king, and without giving him the whole story, is going to tell enough of the story to get the king to sign on to the plot. The first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast, and here's the word P-U-R, and pur is going to be the term for casting lots. And you'll find examples of this even in the Old Testament. But they cast lots before Haman day after day, and they cast it month after month until the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and we'll explain why in a second. Haman said to the king, there is a certain people scattered abroad, dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of every other people. And now that's true, isn't it? They are. But notice then what he says and doesn't say. They do not keep the king's laws, so that it is not to the king's profit to tolerate them. Well, stop and think, who sent the people back to Jerusalem in the first place? Cyrus. Darius is going to be involved in helping with rebuild the temple and stuff. And so a grain of truth with a whole group of fabrication and untruths that are there. So if it please the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who have charge of the king's business, so they may put it in the king's treasuries, and we'll notice the amount here in a second. So the king took his signet ring from his hand, gave it to Haman the Agagite, the son of, and it's a long name, Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews. And the king said, the money is given to you, the people also, to do with them whatever seems good to you. So let's go ahead and read the rest of the decree, and then we'll see what takes place from there. 3:12. The king's scribes were summoned on the 13th day, and the edict, according to all that Haman commanded, was written to the king's satraps and to the governors all over the provinces and the officials of the people, to every province in their script, in their language, and in the name of the king, and sealed with the king's signet ring. And you remember the very opening of the book, we find out, there's 127 of these. And we used the expression earlier, the Persians are going to rule basically from India all the way down into Egypt and all the way through Asia Minor and Turkey. So they have the equivalent of our Pony Express, these very highly bred, thoroughbred horses and couriers to take messages throughout. And so this is going to be done again in the name of the king, sealed with his ring. But in reality, it's Haman's decree and not the king's. But it has all the official things because of what took place. Verse 13, the letters were sent by couriers to kill, let's start back, to destroy, to kill, to annihilate all Jews, young and old, women and children on one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, and to plunder their goods. A copy of the document was issued as a decree in every province by the proclamation to all the peoples to be ready for that day. The couriers went out. They were hurriedly by order of the king, and the decree was issued in Susa, the capital, and the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was thrown into confusion. And so this is a part of our case study tonight, is to see that, and we'll look at these verses in a second, but because of the pride and the anger of Haman, a whole group of consequences are set into place. And while he hasn't told the king the whole truth, he has told him enough of the truth to get him to sign on to this. And so the decree is made. And what we're going to see is that from the time that it's given until it's to be carried out, there's nearly a year interval, which is going to be an absolute blessing for all of God's people. So I thought it'd be interesting, just, and again, samples. I just selected some verses on pride, and you stop and think, what is the sins that are described in 1 John? Lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, pride of life. And so none of us are going to be in a position to be able to inflict this kind of damage on a group of people. But I think what's helpful is for all of us to realize there are certain areas where, and let me say it this way, we either can sometimes get our feelings hurt, or we can have our pride hurt, or even worse, we can stoop to retaliating. And one of my older preacher friends, he said, son, never, ever get involved in retaliation and mess up something that in his own time God will do a whole lot better than you will. You just turn these people back to God. You never get involved in some act of retaliation. And you look at Mordecai, and that's exactly what he's going to do. He does all of these elaborate plots and hatching of things to the point that he has the king's decree, the signet ring, and the law can't be changed. And they have cast the lot to see when to do this. And so the PUR has to do, again, with that process of casting the lot. And we'll see this as we get later, because I haven't tracked this down. I wonder if that's where the Feast of Purim is going to actually come from, because you've got the PUR, which is the casting of the lot. And we'll come to that a little bit later. So here's some verses on pride. And again, samples from the book of Proverbs. This was the expression. Haman was bursting with pride and self-glorification. Proverbs 8:13. The fear of the Lord is hatred of evil. Pride, arrogance, and the way of evil and perverted speech I hate. 11:2. When pride comes, then comes disgrace, but with the humble is wisdom. Proverbs 16:18. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Proverbs 21:24. Scoffer is the name of the arrogant, haughty man who acts with arrogant pride. Proverbs 29:23. One's pride will bring him low, but he who is lowly in spirit will obtain honor. And I think, again, these are just, I use the term positive warnings for us because, like I said, by nature, most of us aren't just this actually prideful, but let me process this just for a second. Let me say it this way. An unguarded strength is one of our greatest weaknesses. And I can name 4 or 5 guys who eventually had an affair, and at least 3 of them said, I never thought I would do this. Oh, since I'm never going to do this, then I don't have to worry about that. And an unguarded strength can become our greatest weakness. Oh, well, I would never have pride like Haman. Well, that's probably true. But I'm very conscious of this, not in a fearful way, but in a respectful way. How much experience has Satan had in tempting people since the Garden of Eden? 6,000 years. Yeah, 6,000 years. And you stop and think, we're dealing with someone who is a master at that. And rather than saying, oh, I would never do that. And one of the guys that I worked with was talking about his son who was 13 or 14. And we were talking about stuff, and he said, oh, my son would never do that. And I'm thinking, my kids could because they're related to me. Anything that could be a temptation, if we're not prepared for it, we can slip into it, and an unguarded strength can become our greatest weakness. And in other areas, I've heard people say, oh, I never thought that would happen to me. And be very cognizant of the skill of the adversary. He is a roaring lion, going about doing what? Seeking whom he may devour. Look at the other one with anger. A man of quick temper acts foolishly, and a man of evil devices is hated. Whoever is slow to anger has great understanding, but he who has a hasty temper exalts folly. That's going to sound both like Xerxes and Haman. Be not quick in your spirit to become angry. Sorry, I duplicated a word. Anger lodges in the hearts of fools. James 1. My beloved brothers, let everyone be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger, for the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. And as I looked at these, and again, thinking in terms of a case study, here are very specific instructions from Scripture. And when you look at these 2 guys, they are the embodiment, in a negative way, of what Scripture says don't do. Here's the warning. The second thing, Xerxes and Haman are at very different levels of Persian society as the king, and yes, Haman has been promoted, but their character faults are more alike than different. Vashti refused to come to the king. He became enraged, and his anger burned within him. So all of the events that led up to Esther becoming queen are there because of the king's quick-tempered and anger. That was 1:12. 2:1, when the anger of the king had abated. And look at all of those activities in that first chapter were given as an example are there because of this outburst of anger by the king and the deposing of Queen Vashti, and all the events that took place are the product of his anger. And then we've read this, when Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage to him, he's filled with fury. So here's a couple of passages, and Kelly anticipated this for us, and that's always wonderful when we anticipate what's going to take place. When you go back to 1 Samuel 15, the Agagite is probably from King Agag, the king of the Amalekites. And you'll see references to these people, and they're considered arch enemies. They plundered and killed some of God's people when they're making the journeys and other things. And God's going to say at one point, oh, the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. And so here were people who, in a previous time, in a previous century, were mortal enemies, and his name is the same. And that we're not told specifically, oh yes, he's related back with these people, but that's a very strong possibility. When you look at Haman, again, the plot and the case study, his name is going to appear 45 times in this relatively small book. And notice he'll be described as the enemy of the Jews. And that term is going to be used 4 different times. And actually the word to destroy is going to occur 5. And so here's where we watch the consequences of anger. This is 5:1. Once Haman decided to destroy an entire group of people to defeat one person, he cast lots, and there's the word, the pur, P-U-R, to determine, and this is our term, the lucky day to begin his reign of terror. And so when they cast these lots to decide the time to do this, he's decided to do the deed, but it's as if he appeals to the casting of lots. And like we said, the benefit of this is that this is going to give time for the rest of the story to unfold compared to if it had been a month later. So there's going to be kind of an extended break from when the decision and the edict goes out and when it's actually carried out. When you look at 5:2, and I just kind of shuddered as I looked at this, he must have been extremely wealthy. The equivalent of 10,000 talents of silver is 333 tons of silver. Can I say that again? 333 tons of silver is what Haman offers to put up because of his anger of one man. Can you kind of do a scale like this and say just something's totally out of proportion, and we're not just going to destroy this one man, we're going to try to destroy all the people. We don't know. Some wondered, is the money going to be used to actually carry this out? And the different details are there, but still that's just stunning to think that he offers the king 333 tons of silver to retaliate against one man. Five three. Everything about Haman is hateful. And in fact, everything that Haman is, God hates. And here again, here's Proverbs. And you read this and you think again, here's a part of the case study. Here's the individual. And look at these descriptions from Proverbs. There are 6 things the Lord hates. 7 are abomination. Haughty eyes, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that haste to run to evil, a false witness who breathes out lies, and one who sows discord among brothers. And you look at that and think, check, check. Every one of these are virtually descriptions of this man and what he's choosing to do. I was reading a book that has to do with the character study, again, in the book of Esther, and I often don't read extended quotations. My wife, the elementary school teacher, says, please don't read to me. I've got 2 eyes, and I can read myself, and so I very seldom read to her. We talk about a lot of things, but she says, don't read to me. I can read. So I'm going to read to you for a little bit. And here's the quotation. Haman is devoured by his obsession with control. Such an obsession is a single, ineradicable notion that dominates the thoughts and feelings in spite of one's own will. Mordecai's refusal to show fear, indeed, is very present in the king's gate, proves to Haman that whatever his might, he lacks control. He cannot govern the Jews' emotions. He can't even prevent his current position in the place of power. But ironically and appropriately, Haman's obsession with control, in fact, imposes Mordecai's presence upon all his thoughts and gives Mordecai power over his mind, robbing him of all pleasure he might derive from the honor, wealth, and power which he glories. Haman makes him miserable. In a lifetime, none of us know the types of things that we may suffer because of the decisions and consequences of others. When our son, I think, was about 17, one of his classmates was coming home from visiting a girlfriend, and Crossroads Mall, South 240, and he's driving in. She had been drinking, among other things, and from Tinkerfield, she's been on the wrong side of the interstate, and she hits Ryan head on just about Crossroads Mall, at probably 80 miles an hour and kills him. There were 3 trials. She was just like a plastic credit card, no emotion, no guilt. This was someone else's fault. And moms, you think about this, being in a trial and hearing the policeman say, I got the word at the airport, I drove 120 miles an hour, and when I came over the hill, she had just hit him. So I reached inside the broken window and held the young man in my arms when he died. Mom, how would you like to go through that 3 different times with someone who takes no responsibility at all for her actions? So none of us know what is going to happen to us. None of us know the events in life. And I remember listening to James Dobson on a radio program. He was flying out of California, headed east, and the man next to him was blind. And so they had a considerable period of time. They got to talking to him, how did you become blind? And the guy said, well, me and a business competitor had a very intense competition, and he hired someone to throw acid in my face, into my eyes, and I lost my eyesight because my competitor in business hired a guy to throw acid in my face, and I lost my sight. And James Dobson said, there was silence for a little while, and then I finally said, well, what did you do? He said, well, unknown to him, I have given him 2 loans through a third party to help keep his company in business, because I figure if I don't forgive him, I've lost twice. I've lost my eyesight, but I don't want to lose my soul. Would any of us be able to give a loan of considerable amount to someone that we know has cost us our eyesight? And see, that's what I'm saying. We never know when things are going to happen, and technically we can be right, okay? And I'm back with Ryan's family. Her dad, Ryan's dad was not only a policeman for years. Anything that happened in South Oklahoma City, he was on the TV. The Dallas newspaper said, never go to Oklahoma City because if you kill a policeman's son and all, they just took the girl's position, and this just went on and on for about 4 years. Here's the father of the deceased son. If she would ever have acknowledged the guilt of killing my son, I would have gone into the witness stand as a policeman to plead for leniency on her case if she would just acknowledge that she killed my son. Kelly, are you going to step into the witness box for someone who's killed one of your children to ask that they receive leniency? And when I talked to David about this, the same type of thing, he said, I've lost my son. I can't bring him back. I don't want to lose my soul by being so righteous and so right that I develop an anger towards someone that causes me to lose my soul. And that's what I'm saying. Many of these things hopefully won't happen to us, but as we just look at life, none of us know what's going to take place, and thinking ahead of time about the dangers of pride, I'm right, or anger, I am going to retaliate, are important parts of our case study tonight. So here's number 6 toward the bottom. I kind of giggled when I put this one in. The same postal system, Pony Express, that told women to be submissive to their husbands because the king's wife wasn't. I laugh every time that goes out. My wife's not doing what I'm telling you to do, and so wives, you're supposed to be submissive. And so we've got to tell the whole world about it. And I'm just thinking there's just something that doesn't quite ring right with that. So this new decree is sent out, sealed with the king's seal for the destruction of the Jews. And some estimate some of the Jews may be trying to flee, to get away, vacate their property. This may be a part of Haman's plan for how he's going to recover the down payment to bring this about. We don't know all the backstory of all the things that are going to take place. But here's a word that we'll keep coming back to, and it's the word providence. Providence allowed for a considerable period of time to give time for the events of the rest of the book to unfold for the deliverance and actually the retaliation of the Jewish people. In addition to a love for drinking, Haman and Xerxes shared a callous indifference to the value of human life. Herodotus, who wrote, and we talked about this earlier, when Xerxes and them crossed the Hellespont in 480 to attack Greece. The Persians, any decision they make when they are sober is reconsidered afterwards when they are drunk. So one of the things that always rings in my mind as I read through this, this is the guy that they build the bridge across the Hellespont, much where Paul is for the Macedonian call. And they're going to transport this massive army in these boats tied together. A storm comes up. Some of the boats are destroyed and everything. So here's a real mark of sanity. He sends a guy down with a hot branding iron to brand the sea, and another guy with a chain to give the sea a lashing for its misbehavior. Wouldn't you like to be married to somebody like that? And so this is our king, and that's a part of the case study of him. And every time I read Esther, those events come to mind. And yes, with this quick temper, then he makes this quick decision. Sometimes we don't need to just count to 10. We need to just stop and pray and seek God's will on something before we act hastily. And again, what did James say? Let every man be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. So here's again a warning. We touched on this last time, but it's still appropriate. Proverbs 31, 4 and 5. It's not for kings, O Lemuel, to drink wine or rulers to take strong drink, lest they drink and forget what has been decreed, pervert the rights of the afflicted. So in Esther, we're going to find Ahasuerus is a king, and I thought this was an interesting expression. He is drunk with power. His extravagance and lifestyle gave quickly way to a violent temper. And then here's, and I should have put Haman instead of Ahasuerus. He was actually bloated with the new power that he had. So vanity and drinking. And I laughed. Chapter 1, the disobedience of one woman results in an edict for all the women in the realm. And we're gonna involve the whole Pony Express to send this word out. Ladies, obey your husbands. That's right. Aren't you glad she came to class tonight? And again, I laugh, unlike what my wife has done. And then in chapter 3, the disobedience of one man causes all the couriers to go out, and the decree is listed to destroy an entire nation. But, and here's the backstory. What Haman and Xerxes do not know is that God is not going to allow his people to be completely destroyed. 2000 BC, count the stars of the sky. Through you, I'm going to bless all nations. God comes to David, sends the prophet, 2 Samuel 7, 12 through 14. One of your descendants is going to sit on the throne forever. And in spite of the human plotting and planning and the things that go on, and even in Jeremiah 29, God's going to tell, and again, J-E-R, Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, is in J-E-R, Jerusalem, when Jerusalem falls. And he says, God is sending you into captivity, he's sending you into exile, but he will bring you back. And here's what's so important. Regardless of what happens internationally during our lifetimes, we always need to remember that ultimately God is in control. And what was our statue in Daniel? Head of gold, Babylonians, silver, Medes and Persians, legs and thighs, bronze, the Greeks, feet of clay and iron, Romans. And in the days of those kings, the Romans, God is going to establish a kingdom which shall never be shaken and never be destroyed. So when we're part of the Lord's church, we're part of something that has been decreed by God, is always going to exist in some form or another, and regardless of what happens to us individually or even our nation, God is still going to be in control. So as you read through Esther, and encourage you just through the week to keep reading through, just notice these different personalities, their character are going to be woven into the story like a tapestry. And we're going to see, again, this was another outline, Haman's promotion, the casting of the lots, the orders to kill. And here's something I want you to think about. God sometimes uses the weakness of various characters through Scripture to actually accomplish his purposes. Did God want Samson to be involved with Delilah? No. And against the protest of, oh, go get this woman for me because she's beautiful, and the tragedy of his weaknesses is ultimately going to be that he loses his eyesight. Lee occasionally will grace me with one of his jokes, and I had to tell him one the other night. I said, how did Delilah get into Samson's house? She cut his locks. Sorry. That one's for you, Lee. But that wasn't God's will, but he used his weaknesses to accomplish that. You can look at examples of Joseph's brothers. And I've literally have cried over this. 10 brothers watch a dad cry his eyes out for 17 years, and nobody peeps. We sold him. And what does Joseph finally say? You meant it for harm, but God meant it for good. When you read Matthew, there's a turning point at the very end when Judas, because he doesn't get the cut from the ointment, this could have been sold and given to the poor, he immediately goes to the chief priest, and what does he do? 30 pieces of silver, the price of a slave. He betrays Jesus. So without violating free will, God sometimes uses human weakness to accomplish his purposes and his will. So here's our final thought. And again, we appreciate you being in class and hope you have a blessed week. God is at work even during our greatest disappointments. I went with an elder once to go to 2 different congregations to tell them that the good brother that they had been supporting had had an affair. The family was having to return. And the elder that asked me to go with him had this comment to both elderships: we are committed to staying with this family until God brings good out of the confessed sin that has taken place. We are committed to staying with this family until God brings good out of this. And because the elders did that, the person involved has been an elder in the Lord's church for probably 20 or 25 years now. That if they would have just said, out of here, you're gone, good luck, that would never have happened. God is at work even in our greatest disappointments. He may be shaping, preparing us for something we could never imagine at the moment. We cannot see the end of struggles and trials while we're in the midst of them. We must walk by faith and not by sight. God may be bringing about a greater good in our lives than we can see at the present. And I'll continue to say this. Don't want to just bore you with it, but it's still true. We learn more from God from the rearview mirror than we do the windshield. And all of us at one time or another can just kind of have these Job-like experience and wonder, why is God letting this happen? But stay faithful, and in time, we will learn more about God when we look back than when we look forward. Last quote: The book of Esther serves the purpose of showing how divine providence overrules all things, even in a distant country, a far country. God's people are yet in his hands. And of one of the two books in the Bible that doesn't mention God, we're going to find the fingerprints of providence all over all of the rest of the events that take place in the book. God bless.